So A Quiet Place Part 2 tells the story of the Abbott family leaving their farmhouse to venture into unknown territory. What's up, guys? Well, A Quiet Place Part 2 is upon us, and I actually did not get a chance to review the original A Quiet Place. I was hoping to have time this week to be able to do it. As life happens, didn't get a chance to. I was a big fan of that first film. I thought that it was very different, very simplistic, but very well executed. It had a lot of great tension. The acting was phenomenal all the way throughout it. And I was always looking forward to a second part. And we got it a lot sooner than I thought we were going to. Fortunately, we had to wait a year, but there's a really nice little coming full circle effect that I had with this movie. I mean, this was the last movie that was about to be released before the world kind of shut down. And now that it's kind of come full circle a year later and things are starting to open back up, things are starting to look up, we're all going back to the theaters, or most of us, and now we finally get to check out A Quiet Place Part 2. Aside from the movie, that's just a nice experience to have, just that feeling of getting back to normalcy. Finally. But as far as the movie, A Quiet Place Part 2 picks up literally at the second that the original film ends. The original film ends on a very abrupt note, but an appropriate note for the story that they were telling. This one picks up seconds later. You get a little bit of an intro with, showing day one, showing bits of, giving you hints of how this might have started off, and you kind of fill in the blanks yourself unless they decide to explore that further with another film. And then immediately, where the first film ends, we kick off here with the Abbott family leaving this farm and venturing into territory that they are not used to going into to try to seek safety. Now that they got this baby that's going to be fucking crying its ass off, the father died in the last movie, and they have no choice but to go out and to throw caution to the wind and hopefully find shelter and maybe even other people outside of that area. By the way, totally spoiler free. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that at this point. I'm always spoiler free whenever it's a new movie, but for anybody that might be watching me for the first time, not gonna get into specifics here. So starting off with the positives for A Quiet Place Part 2, just like the first film, this film is again a simplistic idea that is executed extremely well. John Krasinski is just an awesome director, and he also had a hand in the writing. Actually, I think he got sole writing credit in this one while he was co-writing the first one. So this very much is his baby. It is his brainchild. And I think that he, as a director, as a filmmaker, gets to shine even more in this one. Maybe that's because he doesn't have to worry about his acting performance as well, because his character is gone. He can just step behind the camera. But you really feel his growth as a director. You feel his growth in telling this story and his ambition in telling this story. And I just think everything directing-wise that John Krasinski does, from the camera work to the cinematography to the way that he slowly builds tension, to the way that he focuses on these characters, to the way that he builds out these characters, it's just done masterfully. The guy has a hell of a career ahead of him, even if he never acts again as a filmmaker. And part of what he executes so well in this one that I think he does even better than in the first one is the rising tension, the way that he really does make your heart start to pound, the way that he makes you go to the edge of your seat time and time again throughout the runtime of this sequel. There's so many sequences that aren't even really just in-your-face, action-centric, the monster's right there type of scene. It's all a little bit more subtle. With the title A Quiet Place, it's in those quieter moments. It's in those moments where everything feels like it's gonna be okay, but you always feel this sense of dread, like something bad is just moments away. And even scenes where the daughter gets a lot more focus in this, and she is a deaf character, so whenever it focuses in on her, the sound kind of goes out of the movie completely, and you're just listening to, you're watching a silent film at that point, which makes it even worse, because before you can hear like the monster shriek in the distance, or you can hear a bottle drop, and you're like, oh shit, they're gonna hear that. When you're the daughter, when you're in her point of view, you can't hear anything. So the camera just pans around, you're like, where's that bitch at? He's somewhere. She's making noise, something's going on, and then lo and behold, some of these scenes, you just see it in the background, one of them big ass arms, and you're like, oh, run, bitch! And even during those more action-centric scenes where these monsters are just full force trekking after these people, or where they're just tearing through numerous people in the background, they always do a really good job with the camera work of focusing on the characters. It never really feels like it tries to go for spectacle. It never really feels like it's trying to go full-blown monster movie to where you want to focus on these monsters and just see the terror that they're going, kind of focused on them, either a bird's eye view or through their POV. They're always in the background. It's always somewhere else in the shot. Sometimes where you even have to look for it. Like there's a scene in the trailer where Emily Blunt is hauling ass backwards in reverse in her car, and this bus is coming forward, and you just slowly see the arm coming out. And if you weren't even paying attention to that and you're focusing on what the camera's focused on, which is Emily Blunt and her son, you wouldn't even see it. And that's just a very cool, unique way to do a monster film, and it gives this whole movie a different flavor and a different form of rising tension. Also thought that the characters as well as the performances by the actors were just as good, if not better, than the first film. I will say Emily Blunt, the last film was probably her best performance ever. I mean, that bathtub scene where she's having to give birth quietly is just insane how good she is in that. So I would say that she's a little bit better in the first film just because of that scene, but that's a tall bar. Everybody else in this movie, I think, best the first film because their character gets a little bit more time to shine, especially the two kids. They get a little bit more development. They get a little bit more to do in the story in the absence of John Krasinski, their father. And I like the way that the story takes those two kids too, where you have one trying to kind of take that leadership role that her father had, trying to find a way to help everybody else, trying to find the answer to this situation, and then you have the other kid that's kind of facing his fears throughout the movie. I thought that was a nice way to kind of split them off into their own little character arcs. And then you have the addition of Killian Murphy in here, who I wasn't sure how big of a character he was going to be, and he's a pretty sizable character in this movie. He might as well be co-lead, and I love this guy. He's one of those actors that for whatever reason, I always forget about him. He's never like on my list of favorite actors, but whenever he shows up, I'm like, dude, I love this fucking guy. It's going to be great. And he's awesome in this movie. He's a great, different character to add into this family where he's not necessarily this hero. He's a little bit more trying to keep back from the heroism to survive, but then he gets his own character arc as well where that gets pushed, where he has to find ways and find his humanity to go out and fight for people and to go out and save people and not just worry about surviving one more day. It's about what are we surviving for. Movie is incredibly well paced, and that also is attributed to how wonderfully it is edited. There is so many sequences, like one in particular where there's 3 different characters in a normal scene that slowly starts to go bad and then just goes batshit crazy, and it just goes between all 3 of them and switches between all 3 storylines, all 3 characters, to a point where you just continuously feel that tension rising in all 3 storylines. None of them feel like they're getting shortchanged for the other one. It doesn't feel like it's taking your focus away and killing the effect. You're just sitting there gripping the edge of your seat as this person's about to get fucked up and that person's walking into a really bad situation and that dude's making a really bad decision, and the way that they edit between them just keeps you on the edge of your seat and keeps you invested in all 3 of these in a way that I've rarely seen. Normal times when they do stuff like that, I'm the first one to bitch and be like, you're taking away from the effect of that one by cutting back and forth. You should just stay on that one. Not here. But as far as the pacing, the movie feels like it trims all of the fat, and not in a way where it feels short or it feels like it's rushing to the finish line. It just feels like every scene is the appropriate length that it should be. Like there's numerous times throughout the story where there's a journey ahead. You know, we got to get to that long ass little fire that's miles away, and the movie just cuts to where they get there. And you don't feel like you're getting shortchanged. You don't feel like it's blasting through the story or you're missing out on some character development. It just feels like it kind of cuts out areas of the film that aren't necessary. That happened a couple of times to where I was almost relieved. You see it and you're like, oh, we're about to get 15 minutes of exposition while they're walking. Oh, they're already there. And my final positive, without giving too many specifics, is that I think this movie does a great job at kind of splitting up the family a little bit and getting everybody in their own storylines and getting everybody in different character arcs and different directions in a way that didn't make it feel like we lost the family dynamic. Anytime you have a group dynamic and in the sequel you want to try to do something different, that's always a risk that you run, and more times than not, it doesn't really feel as cohesive as the other film because everybody's off doing their own thing. Here, I feel like it made sense. The editing certainly helped that. The story that they chose to tell certainly helped that. And as an added bonus, it alleviated my one fear in this movie, which is how are you going to get me to believe that that baby can keep quiet? They found a nice way in the story to make that believable. As far as the mix, there's only one element to this sequel, or really this franchise thus far, that I'm a little bit on the fence about. It seems that the stylistic choice of John Krasinski is that to take the storyline of these movies and just move the overall storyline incrementally forward very slowly. What I mean by that is that, by the end of the first film, the main victory is that, oh, we figured out how we can kill these things now, and then it just cuts the story off. And then you get into part two, and I'm not going to say what happens or what their overall goal is, but by the end of it, it feels like their overall goal or their overall mission in this world, it really just went a small step forward by the end of it. Now, there is some emotional closure, there is some emotional resonance to the storyline of this movie and the character arcs of this movie coming to a close, a crescendo at the end of the film. But whereas the end of the first film upon rewatch felt like the appropriate spot to end that chapter of the story, this one felt like there was a bit more to tell here. It feels like the movie could have done a little bit more to progress things, in my opinion. Now, while I'm mixed on that because I do like how unique that is. I do like the fact that this franchise doesn't really feel like each movie is like its own gigantic section of the story. It almost feels like each movie is literally just a chapter. And that's very interesting. That's something that you really will not see in very successful franchises like this very often. So by the end of A Quiet Place Part 3 or 4, or however many of these we end up getting, when the story comes to its full conclusion, I might look back on all this and say, nope, that's perfect. That's exactly how it should be. But as of right now, when I only have 2 pieces of this story, it just feels like we should have been a little farther along by now. And now moving on to the negatives, and these are small negatives. These are negatives that were honestly, that they're like glorified nitpicks for me. One of which is that I felt like they could have done a little bit more to explore the other evils of the world. It's in the trailer and we kind of know because it's almost cliche at this point when you have a post-apocalyptic movie and we're gonna venture out, we're gonna find out that the monsters aren't the only threat out there. There's even a direct line of dialogue from Killian Murphy where he says that, where he's talking about saving people and he's like, you don't know what humanity has become. These people are not worth saving. And when he says that, I built it up in my head that we're gonna get certain things, certain expectations were built up that we're going to explore that a little bit more, when really we just touched on it a little bit in the film. Now, while doing that, they kind of combat the cliche direction, but at the same time, I almost feel like there was just more to develop there. You could have battled that cliche by doing something different with that, not just avoiding it altogether. And my other negative is that there's at least 3 or 4 scenes, especially in the third act, that I was a little bit frustrated with the characters moving extremely slow. Now, normally you gotta be slow, you gotta be quiet, you gotta pick your movements very carefully in this movie, but there's certain scenes where it's like, okay, you just have to reach out and touch this thing and you're safe. You're on base. And instead of just doing that, they like stare and move backwards. And it's like, what the that person's gonna fucking die, move. It wouldn't have stood out to me if it didn't happen like at least 3 or 4 times in the third act. So it's to the point where it's like, that's the small moments where it feels like you're forcing tension when naturally that wouldn't happen. But overall, guys, I really enjoyed this sequel. I really enjoyed this franchise thus far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what John Krasinski is going to continue to do as a director, whether it's staying in this franchise or venturing off and doing other things. I have a hard time believing that anybody that enjoyed the first film would not enjoy this just as much, if not more. And if nothing else, they make one hell of a double feature, being that they immediately just carry the story on from the second that the first one ends. Thought it was masterfully directed. I thought there was incredible tension, great characters, great performances, and very small negatives, if any, just nitpicks by the end of it. It was a great experience, and definitely check this thing out in theaters if you feel safe to do so, because that sound design needs to be heard in the theaters. So if you enjoyed A Quiet Place Part 2 is an awesome follow-up to that original film. It takes the characters into uncharted territory and takes you back into everything that you loved about the first film. So definitely check this thing out in theaters if you can, and when it finally hits the shelves, go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of A Quiet Place Part 2? Are you a fan of the first one? Did you like this one more, less? Are you looking forward to a third one? How many do you think we can have in this franchise before it feels like it's going on too long? Do you think we can get one more and wrap everything up, or do you want to see 4, 5, 6 of these? Let me know down below and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so that you can check out all of my future reviews, rankings. We got a couple Resident Evil ones coming out this weekend, so definitely hit the subscribe button to check out that. Thank you for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.